hear me okay? Okay, well, thank you, Aaron and Derek and Jody and Michael, who I haven't met yet, and sponsoring institutions. It's a privilege to be here and to have this opportunity to share some of our work with this group in such a timely and I think much needed discussion that we're going to have around these rapidly changing technologies in archaeology. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that kind of for me evolved in somewhat fortuitously as a collaboration with the Ministry of Culture in Peru, the Capacñan project. And our goal was to document kind of mid-scale archaeological phenomena at high resolution. So, you know, we tend to be really good at mapping really small stuff and really big stuff, and the stuff in the middle tends to get kind of lost, is the nut I'm trying to crack here, basically. You know, we do excavation mapping, even using, you know, old school technology really well. We can map regional survey quite well, obviously schematically, but at that scale we don't need much more. But there's a big range of mesoscale phenomena between those two. Big settlements, big sites, right? Landscapes, so irrigation systems, field systems, you know, logistical systems, road networks that I'll talk about here. Those kinds of things we tend to look at or represent very schematically, or to the extent that we can document them in detail, it tends to be by very laborious or pretty expensive kinds of methods. So short of that, we end up with kind of analytically impoverished representations of these mid-scale phenomena, right? Kind of the subway map of Tikal there or something, you know, it's very schematic kind of a representation. And so what I'll talk about is combining low-altitude photogrammetry with UAVs or with a balloon with mobile GIS to enable a high-resolution, richly attributed registry of these mid-scale features, settlements, and landscapes. And of course, all of these fields are exploding right now, as we all know. We all kind of, I think, at one time or other had a kind of vertiginous feeling of, oh my God, this is changing so fast, I can't keep up, and every field season it's something different, right? That's certainly the case in the UAV sort of segment, where, I mean, and these changes are largely positive. Commercial systems are offering much more ready-to-fly kinds of solutions. The prices are going way down. In the open source community, there's a massive proliferation of UAVs going on, and the prices are well within reach of, you know, dissertation scale kinds of projects. In the photogrammetry space, as many of us I'm sure are aware, there's, you know, highly automated software now for mass imagery matching, and these programs are getting a lot more efficient, they're getting easier to use, they're getting more precise and more accurate. And lastly, the mobile GIS, which I'm not as qualified as many in this room to talk about, but, you know, we're definitely in this post-PC, post-ArcPad, we could say, era, and there's a proliferation of mobile applications, whether that's platform dependent or agnostic, as Sam was sort of saying there. So what I want to get at is sort of how we might be able to integrate these things, and so that we have to integrate the UAV or geospatial control component, the photogrammetry component, and the mobile GIS component together. So why map at mid-scale at high granularity? You know, there probably aren't too many archaeologists who would say, you know, my maps are too good. I don't want more granularity. But at the same time, we're also getting to a point where, you know, we can be drowning in data, and what are we really doing, right? So what I'm proposing is that we don't just go for granularity's sake. That's not the way of putting it, but even though in some contexts we can map even at a higher than one-to-one scale, you know. And I'm thinking of, you know, photogrammetric documentation of excavation contexts where you can look after the fact and see things that you didn't while you were excavating with that scale of representation. But I think that, having, the point should be that you have a problem that you need to solve, and here are the tools to do it. And that's kind of the approach that we took in these projects that I'll present. One of them is as I say, sort of cultural heritage management project. The idea is that what we did was try to create a 3D digital repository on the one hand of cultural patrimony, and that would then serve as a guide for policy, and for concrete efforts at these sites. And then in my own research, I'm very interested in understanding the relationships between the built environment at a sort of site scale, and then its placement within the landscape in the colonial era in Vice-Regal Peru. So those are the two areas I'll talk about. So the first of those specifically is a collaboration with the Capacñan project, which is the Inca Royal Highway, is what Capacñan means in Quechua. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The other one is this colonial mass resettlement project, the research project I'll present. That's a much smaller scale, kind of intensive site level architectural survey using aerial imagery and mobile GIS. And these range from, sea level to 4,000 meters above sea level in the Andes. So we were kind of using the Andes as a test bed for testing this equipment in very different kinds of environmental settings. So the first of these, so the Capacñan project was recently recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. 6 countries, actually thousands of sites under this umbrella. It was a massive undertaking involving many institutions in the Central Andean republics. Within that Peru is sort of the core of this, as the core of the Inca Empire. The Capacñan project over the last decade or so has documented something like 3,000 kilometers in the field of the Capacñan network. So that map on the right is the Basemap that they produced. So yeah, 3,000 kilometers registered. And with that, the current director of that project, Giancarlo Marconi, one of the co-authors of this paper, is trying to approach this from a new model of heritage management. Rather than site-based approach, he wants to look at these sub-projects as sort of cultural corridors or landscapes. And there's good archaeological reasons for this, in the sense that the Incas themselves, their aesthetics and their sense of landscape superseded the site as the unit. They thought on a grander scale than that. And also, in the current situation, rather than sort of having a site that is being constantly, quote unquote, threatened by development interests or urban encroachment and so forth, how do we open these sites to the landscape, to the local communities, to make their interests and their ongoing concerns integral to the actual management of the patrimony? In doing that, they've got some major problems. I mean, there's a massive scale of the system that they're looking at. There's thousands of kilometers of roads. Mining interests in the highlands all over Peru, all over Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, urban sprawl, growing urban centers, massive looting happening in most of the Andean republics, and limited resources, as always, in terms of budget and labor and so forth. So how do we deploy these resources? So this was proposed in conversation with Giancarlo. We thought this past summer we could do a kind of test project, a pilot project, building on the sort of enthusiastic use of UAVs in Peru. That's the Vice Minister of Culture there, Luis Jaime Castillo. He's the highest archaeological official in Peru. He flies in them himself. and he's sort of developing a sort of massive arsenal of drones to document Peruvian archaeological sites, which is really important because these sites are disappearing really quickly. Okay, so specifically what we looked at was a really important part of this network. So basically the Inca Royal Highway network is based on most of you are vaguely familiar with this, with a highland route that runs through the intermontane valleys up and down the Cordillera, and then a coastal main highway that is joined by transverse connecting highways up through these arid oases on the coast. And so we're looking specifically at, but down there in the south there where I've got it circled, the transect between Tambo Colorado, which is a monumental Inca center at about 500 meters above sea level, basically coastal, on up to the site of Vilcashuaman, which is a major Inca center, by some accounts the second Cusco, one of the most important centers in the entire Inca Empire. And that same transect continues on to Cusco itself. So the idea was we would gain access to different test conditions for these UAVs, and the Ministry of Culture would gain through the data that we generated and so forth. Okay, so the first site that we looked at is Tambo, Colorado. There on that transect, gives you an idea. There it is within, you get a sense of the arid landscape, and we're at sort of the top end of what's the proper Pisco Valley in Peru. You see the segments of the Capacñan that have been documented in the field. One that goes on to the massive pilgrimage center Pachacamac in modern Lima, outside modern Lima, and then the one that goes up into the highlands up towards Vilcas and Cusco. So zooming in a little bit, within that polygon, that's what we actually documented. That's the scale that we're working at, which looks really tiny there, but this is a huge site. This is a monumental site with palace complexes around a massive trapezoidal plaza, strategically located on this transverse highway. Long research history there, starting in 1901 with Max Uhle, a German archaeologist who produced spectacular maps there, and we've actually got some of those in the same sort of database now. More recently, Jean-Pierre Protzen from UC Berkeley worked with CRC to do a laser scanning project there in the early 2000s. Okay, so what we were going to do is something on a little bit larger scale than either of those, sort of mid-scale. So basically we had to set ground control points first, which took about a day. Then the overflight itself with a UAV, a fixed wing UAV that we used, I'll show you that. That was about 3 flights, 10 to 15 minutes each. Then the processing of the imagery, which is a couple days of work. So, just basic equipment in terms of the field equipment. The UAV we used was a fixed wing, as I say, big wingspan, almost a 9-foot wingspan. Knowing that we were going to higher altitude, you need a lot of surface area to generate lift at at high altitude in the Andes. Not very expensive, about $3,000. So let's put this to play. So this is our first flight at Tambo, Colorado. No 3D yet. You'll know when that's coming. And he was wearing a GoPro camera on his head. So here that comes. And the landing. This is always the nerve-wracking part. I mean, these things are, this is not a toy. By the way, Aurelio, who's flying this, has many, many, many years of RC piloting experience. So he came on the project. He's also a professionally, he's a licensed archaeologist, a rare critter, right? So he was fundamental to this project. I mean, I can't fly these things. These are not toys. They're a lot of fun to work with. So that gives you a basic idea of what we were doing. So the camera's taking images, obviously, as it's flying. We got about a little under 500 images that we selected out of the massive imagery. That's what takes a lot of time, is just selecting the images. Processing itself, we had a really nice high-end workstation that we were working on. So it takes, it just ranges on, you can tweak this stuff forever, but we were working, we can do most of the processing in about 90 minutes for a given run of what we ended up with. And so we documented 70 hectares, a big area that extends beyond the site proper to sort of the greater archaeological zone around it, and the Kapaknyan, the actual Inca highway going in and out of it, with a 27 centimeter pixel resolution DEM and about a 7 centimeter pixel resolution orthomosaic. So that's quite a bit of detail. Now I don't know how this is going to work and the screen is far away. So I don't want to.
We're going to go boo no matter what. We all do.
Okay, so everybody kind of ready? Your brain will probably play tricks and it'll switch back and forth for a little bit. So what I'm going to show you here is the process of, this is our sparse point cloud that came off of that. This is in Agisoft Photoscan that so many of us know and love, that we use a lot. Those are the positions of the cameras over the landscape. So that's the sparse point cloud that it generates by matching texture and color. Those are our ground control points. That's the dense cloud that it generated. So that's still just points. And if you zoom in enough, I think you'll see that. So here we're looking down at the central part of the site, that is what we call the Northern Palace on the north side of the Trapezoidal Plaza. So we got relief out of the buildings themselves. These are adobe structures that are, most of them are 3-4 meters high, something like that. So now I'm going to switch it back to this. Now this is the textured model. So this is a sort of composite orthomosaic draped over the wire mesh model generated from the imagery. I think that's okay. Zoom in here at the end. So this kind of gives you an idea. I mean, we get really nice three-dimensional data out of it, and good resolution. This doesn't really show the full resolution of the actual ortho image that we export. Okay, you get the idea. Did it work at all?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So here's just a plan view. You don't need the 3D anymore. Well, you could. I mean, it's up to you. With the DEM over the orthomosaic, here's the orthomosaic. This shows the extent of, more or less, the extent of previous mapping efforts, the orange being where Protzen and CR concentrated their efforts, which is absolutely fitting. I mean, they were doing laser scanning at very, very high resolution, so you can't cover as much. And then the red boxes are Ule's excavations and mapping in 1901. So, let me go back here. So, we're getting the greater context of the site. You can see on the Kapaknyan, you can make out a path that more or less is parallel to the modern highway there on the lower part of the screen. So there's a little zoom in of that. Here's what we have, and then here's a zoom in of the Northern Palace complex, more or less at pixels resolution. So that's at about a 7 centimeter resolution. So that gives you a sense of what we ended up with. Here's the Max Ule 1901 map, amazingly precise actually, and Jean-Pierre Protzen has written about how amazing his maps are for 1901. Really, really impressive work. But what's nice obviously here is we can see the site as it was in 1901 and the site as it is in 2015 directly overlaid with each other. In some cases, you've got the highway obliterating what was there before, just as, well, hopefully not, but maybe as our model will show, 100 years from now, what once was. So this is a preliminary sketch based on the orthophotos that Abel Trasariña did in AutoCAD. Brought it in and sort of zoom in of that same area. So we're getting the context of the site, that we get a much more precise map of the Kapaknyan itself, heading out of the site up towards Cusco. And this is where the folks from Kapakyan were very excited because they just couldn't map this part of the site at all. It's very difficult, or they could have, but it would have been really tough, right? And so now they can use this data to guide their efforts. I don't know what happened there, I'm going to crash. Get it back. Is that?
It's all right. There we go. They won't crash in the same place. Sorry, guys. Okay. Yeah. Let me. So that was. Sorry. So that was.
Tambo, Colorado. Now we'll move up the Andes to the site of Incahuasi, which is much higher, 3,800 meters above sea level, so up around 13,000 feet almost, 12,000 feet. This is a really interesting site. It's a really small site, but really fine masonry. I mean, these were very exclusive. This is probably a royal estate that the Inca himself would have sort of past time at. There, it's built around a hydraulic feature. I mean, this is some of the finest masonry types that we find in the empire. I mean, if you were a commoner walking into this place, you would be killed for walking into this place, right? Very exclusive spaces. Set in this landscape, framed in a very specific way, working with the royal highway as it enters and leaves. Not a lot of research here, so not as much to really say. But we did the same thing here with the same UAV. You'll see that it behaves quite a bit differently at this altitude.
See?
But it made it, we threw it off a cliff because we knew we had to get it up to speed to generate enough lift at that altitude. Didn't change any motors, didn't change, I could bore you to death with pitch angles of props and prop sizes and blah, 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 but I won't do that. That was just as it was at Cerro Colorado. We just juiced it all the way. Okay, now it's time for the 3D. So here's the same process at Incahuasi. I think this is already the dense cloud here. There you get a sense of the central kind of precinct of the site. Those two buildings that are kind of reconstructed have a thatch roof on them with a kind of, we're not sure, but probably a kind of administrative space to the right of that. Our photos were a bit of a mess because the UAV was a challenge to control there. We had problems with the intervalometer on the camera in this flight, in these flights. But that's the beauty of photoscan. I mean, it's advanced to the point that you can pretty much throw a lot of junk at it and it can still generate pretty decent data. Not that this is junk, but I mean, we weren't working with ideal data in the sense of what came off the UAV. So we used 361 photos here. Almost 100 hectares that we documented, so a bigger area than at Tambo, Colorado. A little bit coarser DEM, but still really detailed DEM at 34 centimeter pixel resolution, and about a 9 centimeter pixel resolution orthomosaic. With, I don't know if there's some odd chromatic aberrations in the images, but it doesn't affect the resolution, obviously. Gives you an idea. Okay. So that gives you a sense of the resolution there. This is just a sort of static of from ArcScene of the imagery mapped, draped on top of the DEM. Gives you a sense of the way that the Kapakyan moves through the site, and they're framing the site through the approach through this landscape. So yeah, these models and the imagery that we collected, I think, enabled a more broadly contextualized data set for Kapakyan, and they will be using them for management decisions and so forth. The UAV performed pretty well, I think. I mean, I've tried other UAVs in high altitude to very limited degrees of success, and it did quite well. And with more flights, we'll cover more area, or we could intensify coverage if Kapakyan would like higher resolution. That's possible as well. So this last part I'll kind of skim through because we're running short on time. So the second part is related to my own research, and that concerns what's known as the general resettlement in Peru, which was a massive resettlement program in the 1570s. 1.5 million native Andeans were resettled to compact gridded towns. Over 1,000 of these were built in the 1570s. And it was based on a theory of the built environment, that by building miniature urban spaces, these people would become civilized and proper Christian subjects to this generative kind of theory of built environment. And where I work in the Colca Valley down there in the red box in southern Peru, there were hundreds of sites during the Inca era, and they were reduced by and large to about a dozen of these reducciones, one of which, today known as Malchiyacta, was abandoned in the 19th century and is really well preserved architecturally. So it gives us a really almost unique window into understanding the built environment of one of these reduction towns. A couple overviews of it. Over 500 buildings, standing fieldstone architecture, very complex architecture. This is going back now to like 2005, 6, and I was thinking, how could I map this? It's too much to map in detail, but I really want those details. And that's where the idea of working with UAVs in my work initially came from. And so there's the church there, and one of the two plazas. Here's another of the plazas, actually a trapezoidal plaza, an Inca plaza in the middle of this supposedly Spanish colonial town. There's the church, the arch still preserved. You can still walk up that bell tower. So we had very limited success with the UAVs there that we tried in 2012 and 13. But we had a plan B in 2013, which was just a weather balloon. Worked quite well. We had to lug a 300-pound helium tank up to the site, which is not easy. The site's at 4,100 meters, which is why the UAVs didn't work. But it's quite remote. So that was a challenge. So we collected a lot of images, 2,400 images. Here, this gives you an idea of, oops, it's just a quick time lapse here. I won't play the whole thing, give you an idea. So, this is on a tether and they're just walking around the site. And they're kind of guessing where this thing is pointing, and then we're putting this in PhotoScan after we put the ground control points in, image alignment. We got really nice three-dimensionality out of it with the buildings at this scale. So this is a tighter scale, and we ended up with a 5 to 8 centimeter resolution. And this is actually like 8 different chunks or 9 different chunks that are stitched, that are kind of merged together in this composite image. This will give you an idea of the kind of resolution that we have over the church. And what's nice, of course, about this is it's planimetrically correct. There's no off nadir perspective here because we're looking straight down as if it's on a map, which is nice. So this gives you, this will zoom in a little further. We can make out individual stones in these buildings. So the idea then was to use this imagery as a base and then just digitize the architecture directly on top of it. We didn't have the imagery though, so we had to just map it on top of air photos, and we revised it in the lab afterwards. But what we did do in the field, of course, is register all these attributes. So we used, at this time, we used GIS Pro, which is a commercial package that runs on iOS. Very easy to use, very low friction for non-technical people. Flexible, you can add new fields and so forth, very easy for people to use. But we had to manually sync all the data between the different teams. It's locked down, it's within iOS, it's expensive, there's lots of issues with it that way. But we were able to record 65 attributes on pretty much every building. So we've got the map, obviously, plus the GIS with all these attributes. with all the buildings. Lichenometric data, so we measure a particular species of lichen on every building, and we get a sense of their age. So we interpolating that into a sort of date surface of the site. And intensive site survey through this past season. All that's being integrated together, and we'll have obviously density distribution maps and so forth of different artifact classes. We can also build in models of visibility, surveillance at the site, models of movement. I'm working on a kind of network analysis, measuring traffic patterns through the site to the different plazas and so forth. So I'll probably just leave it there in terms of summary and leave it open for questions for you guys, all right? Thanks.